Welcome. Thank you for being here. This is really exciting. I've given plenty of presentations over the last couple of years. I've not given a live presentation in front of this many people, so this is really fun, very energizing. My name is Mike Neal. I'm going to be your presenter today, and in this session, we're really kicking off this track. So we're going to be talking about a lot of topics related to digital transformation and test, but in addition to hopefully educating you guys on the way that we see digital transformation playing out with our customers, I also want to set up the following sessions where there's going to be a lot more detail about a lot of these topics you'll see today. In this session, what we're really going to do is share kind of a journey that we've been on as a company. I've personally been on the same journey working in this area for probably the last 5, 6, 7 years. And a lot of it just starts with talking to you and to customers about what are the things that you're challenged by? What are the goals that you're setting for your organizations? How do you want to evolve the way that you do things? And so a lot of that is reflected in the material that you're going to see. I'd like to make it as discussion oriented as we can. So please, raise your hand, ask questions. I may involve some of my colleagues that are in the room. Some of them are giving sessions that are later on today. But we want to make this, as informative and as helpful as we can. And then obviously we can take even the conversation outside this room afterwards and have follow-up discussions. So let's start with fundamentally, what are we hearing from you? And these are probably not new trends, but I'm certainly expecting that, given the direction the economy is headed and the global supply chain challenges, these are probably not pressures that are getting easier for you. These are things that are getting harder. But it starts with things like the complexity of the products that you're building. So you're building more complex products. Think about typically, some kind of sophisticated electronics. Those products are more challenging to build now than they were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. You have integration of things like 5G or RF, into those products. The designs themselves are just inherently more complicated. Let's talk about cost. That's a constant pressure, especially given, inflation, things are getting more expensive. How do we keep costs under control? And there's obviously a desire to constantly look at the bottom line and understand, how does the time that it takes for us to do something, how does the amount of work or rework that it takes to build a product, how does that affect that bottom line? We also have things like effectiveness. How big are the teams that we're working in? How big are the labs? How much equipment do we have? How do we get the most out of the investments that we've made? We have capital investments that have been purchased. And before we outlay for additional test systems or additional equipment on the line, how do we know that we're getting as much as we can out of the equipment or the facilities that we have? So we hear a lot about these things. And like I said, I don't think these are new pressures, but I think the pressure seems to be more and more acute all the time. So what we found is that really it's all about time. Time is the most important factor. Time to resolving an issue, time to generating revenue for the company. This is the number one thing that's on your minds when we have these meetings. And so what we want to focus on in this session is really reflecting kind of best practices and investments we've made towards product that are really on this digital transformation journey. Now, when I have started having these kinds of discussions with customers, like I said, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, almost every customer I've ever talked to, they themselves, as maybe a leader in their organization or their management, were really pushing for some kind of digital transformation strategy. And it was really rare that we came to the table and really started that conversation. They were already thinking about it. But everyone was in a different place. And today, that remains the same. Everyone's company, everyone's particular team they're on, everyone's division of that company, they're all on sort of a different point in the journey towards digital transformation. It doesn't even necessarily mean the same thing in different companies. What does it mean to be digitally transformed? And I think a lot of that is because the industries are a little different. Often the goals are different. What are we optimizing for? It's going to be different in aerospace than it is going to be in semiconductor. It may be more about in semiconductor, the pressures are all about volume and trying to get, high quality parts out. But you're dealing with millions of parts being produced. In aerospace, it's a different story. You may only build one of the thing that you're building, but it absolutely has to work. There's no exceptions. There can be no escapes. So the pressures are different, and so everyone's digital transformation journey is going to look a little bit different too. So this session, and really the track itself, is designed to give you sort of a way to understand what's important to you. You can ask yourself, where is my company in this journey? Where is my particular group that I work in this journey? Which of these things resonates most with me? Because you're going to see a lot of different ways to interpret that notion of digital transformation. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the need for digital transformation in test. This is obviously the thing that's probably closest to an NI Connect audience. Who here considers themselves to be working somehow in test? Probably almost everybody in the room. So, there's lots of ways to digitally transform your test process. So we're going to talk about what those are. But the backdrop of this is obviously we're trying to build more products. There's more requirements. They're more complex. There's less time. There's less budget. So how do we increase the effectiveness of test in order to offset those challenges? The other thing we're going to talk about is this notion of the role of test in digital transformation, which is not exactly the same topic. It's really about what is the role that test plays in your company. And obviously, we want to make the test process as effective as we can. But test provides some of the most unique insights that your company has, about the products that you're developing. It tells you, essentially, do they work correctly or not? And so that knowledge, and really, most of you have probably experienced this, you're not just getting, did it pass or did it fail? You're getting pretty deep understanding of that product. So that data is really, really valuable, and it's possible to combine that data with other data, with design data, with the manufacturing data itself, with data from the validation lab, and you can get a more 360 picture of your product. How you built it, is it going to work? Is it going to work the way you expected it in the field? Is it going to look like other products that maybe failed in the past, even though it passed? Even though by the definition of what test was looking for, it's a good product. Do we actually have some reason to believe it's not a good product? Or can we just make the process itself of building that product faster? The production process or the validation process faster. So test has a really unique role to play in your organization. And that role is actually becoming more important. So we're going to talk about this notion of product data. You're going to see this theme of product data, and test data is one important form of product data. But there's lots of other data we can combine it with, like I said. So what we're going to do in this session, really in this track, is balance these two views. We're going to talk a little bit about the digital transformation of test. How do we make test, one of those things that's really seen as a strength in your company? You're viewed as setting the bar within the industry of how you do things. And it really gets down to the use of data. How do we use data more effectively in order to make better decisions, in order to be as efficient as possible, and really to affect the bottom line? And then we're also going to balance that out with talking about the role of test in your company as a whole, and making sure that test is not it's not just sort of a tax. It's not just the cost of doing business. It's actually a value add to the organization that allows you, the company, to make the best decisions possible, to have the utmost confidence in the products that you're making. So just to kind of set the stage a little bit and make sure that we're calibrated on, let's say, the terminology, we're going to use sort of this simplified product lifecycle view quite a bit in this session and in this track. So we're talking about sort of the design and prototyping phase as a distinct phase. We're talking about validation as a distinct phase, where you actually have a prototype or a set of prototypes that you're testing in the lab to make sure they meet the specifications that you originally came up with. Moving into production, so now you're building things in volume. And then finally, in use, where you've shipped the product, the customer has it, it's in the field, and you may be getting data, whether it's either telemetry data coming back from that product, or you're hearing about the use of the product. You're getting things like RMAs. Products are being returned, or there's information that you can fold back into the process and use that either to influence the next version of the product. How do I design a better product? Or even in the shorter term, how do I make sure that I don't ship product that has the characteristics of this product that's coming back? And someone is telling me this is not a good product. It passed, but I now know this is not a good product. So how do I evolve what I'm doing to make sure that doesn't happen again? So we'll use this notion of the product lifecycle quite a bit. And it obviously varies a little bit across industry. Aerospace, typically there may be a blurrier line between validation and production depending on the volumes. So it's not a perfect match everywhere, but generally speaking, we see this to be a very, very similar flow across all industries. And really, the end goal is always the same. The end goal is to get better quality, more efficiency, to take advantage of my capacity that I have. How many here are managers of teams? Got a few managers. What's the first question you ask when someone comes and says, hey, I need you to spend a lot of money on buying some additional equipment? What's the first thing you might want to know?
What's it going to buy me?
What's it going to buy you? Do you ever ask yourselves, like, can you show me that you really need this? Can you show that you're not, we can't do this already?
I'm talking to them.
In this scenario? Yeah.
They don't know what things cost.
They don't know what things cost. Okay. There's a budget, right? And there's only so much budget. How do we want to use this budget? Is this the best use of the budget? Time to market. How do we get things out as quickly as possible? Who here has ever had to do a really complex bring up of like a new test system? Anybody? Did you feel the pressure of this is in the way of getting the product out the door, of shipping the new product? This is very necessary, but I have to get this product ramped up. I have to get the yield where I need to. I have to figure out if the test system itself is why this thing's not yielding the way that we expected it to. Is it the product manufacturing process? So there's a lot of ways where test impacts time to market. And then lastly, ecosystem health. So we're going to keep referencing back this notion of the product lifecycle. And there's challenges across the product lifecycle. There's challenges in every phase. Who here works more on the validation side of the product lifecycle? What are some of the things you deal with on a daily basis that are challenging?
I'm relatively new to Strike. I don't have the most experience in that side.
Fair enough. Anybody want to comment on some of their challenges on a daily basis that they're dealing with? When it comes to getting the product ready, getting the product out the door? Sir?
Design is changing every day.
Design is changing all the time. So you have shifting requirements, changing design, which obviously, if you're trying to test it, you have to constantly evolve and adapt to that. Any others? Sir?
Issue tracing with design changes that happen to what issues are you experiencing?
Yeah. Root causing those kinds of problems. So there's a lot of challenges in design. There's a lot of challenges in validation and production. So we kind of go through and just highlight some of them. Inconsistent or maybe changing specifications is a common one that we hear about. On the validation side, we hear a lot about the process of getting all the data pulled together, of making sure that the system is calibrated, making sure that you can. One that we've even heard about if we go talk to customers is, can you help me find my equipment? Someone came into the lab a week ago. They borrowed a board. They sort of wandered off with it. It's in some other system somewhere else in the building, likely. Can you help me track down that asset? So short of sticking one of those Apple, trackers on them, which that might interfere with your signals, that might not be a recommended best practice. How do I find equipment that's maybe walked away in the process of someone trying to get their job done? So in validation, you hear about a lot of challenges. In production, now you're obviously feeling the heat. We're trying to build these products, we're trying to ship them. If the system goes down, if there's unexpected downtime, that's a huge issue on the production side. So there's a real pressure to have maximum uptime, maximum utilization of that capital invest. And then in use, how do we make sure that if we find escapes, we're learning from that process, like I mentioned earlier, and folding the knowledge back into, in the short term, how we build the product. Longer term, how do we actually design a better product? And so NI has been very focused on this notion of, hey, we could do a better job of using data in each one of these phases to improve essentially your ability to do your job. How do we make test engineers, test groups more effective? And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So on the validation side, we'll focus on validation and production. Obviously, this is where NI has the most presence, the most business. Some examples of things that we've been able to work with customers and achieve are things like a 90% deployment time decrease across 170 test systems. So the use case here is, hey, I've got all these testers. I'm walking around with USB sticks. I'm plugging them into a tester. I'm trying to update the code. Maybe I'm updating the LabVIEW VIs or the Python scripts or a test stand sequence. Maybe I'm even running, upgrading which version of LabVIEW it is, not just the code itself, but the actual versions of the software. And I'm going to do that 170 times and sort of cross my fingers that that is going to work and work well enough that it's not going to burn me later on. So we refer to this sort of jokingly as sneaker net. But this is the approach a lot of companies use, where you're just sort of walking around and using a human in the loop to manage systems and make sure they've got the right stuff on them. So one thing we can do is work with you to help you just automate that process. As long as those systems are connected to your intranet, we can push updates automatically. We can verify that the systems are on the right versions with the right software installed, including your code, not just the IDEs themselves, and that they're ready to go. And we can do that in a way where we can make sure it's not done in a fashion. It can be very quick and very painless. So it's trying to take some of the error and put more automation in place. So this is one use case. Another is just trying to run your analytics on your data more quickly. Who here, just a show of hands, if you don't mind me asking, who here has some process in place as you get test data back? Let's say it's on the bench. You're automatically processing all that data. There's some methodology in place where, okay, we're going to always run the right analysis on the data. I saw one hand in the back, a couple other hands. Who feels like that's an area where, and this is where I talk about, everyone's on a different stage of the digital transformation journey. Who feels like they could do more, or they would like to do more in that area? Maybe it's something you want to focus on and figure out how do you evolve that practice. See a few more hands. So we find that that's pretty common. It's not uncommon for customers to be analyzing 5, 10, 20% of their data in an automated way, and everything else is sort of ad hoc. When I think I need the data, then I go track down the data. The data might exist on the tester still. It might be sort of sitting there, and you just hope that no one wanders away with that tester or reimages that tester and you lose that data. It's not always an easy process to centralize everything and to bring it all together. And so when you do that, though, you get opportunities for efficiency, and you get opportunities to improve the time that it takes to reach an insight or to reach a decision. So we have a lot of experience in this area that you'll hear about in the track over the course of the day. And then on the production side, if I jump ahead to that one, really it's about decreasing cycle time, reducing scrap, and trying to make sure that while you're getting these efficiencies in your manufacturing process, using data, using insights about the way that the process was run, you're either fixing your quality or even raising the bar on the quality of the product that you're building. And so that's a challenge. But it really involves, in the case of manufacturing, typically combining a lot of different kinds of data. And that notion of getting that 360 picture gives you the opportunity to sort of correlate, maybe if there is an issue, which step in the process was the one that directly led to it? Or if I get back a bad part, let me find every other part that matched the same characteristics of the bad one, and I can start either changing the way that I'm testing, change the way that I'm producing product, and so on. So it gives you a lot of opportunity for optimization when you're leveraging all this data. Now, there's a lot of customers. Like I mentioned, we've been doing this for a few years, and I think we spent a lot of time early on just kind of getting our bearings as a company. Which things mattered the most to customers? What were the issues that they were stuck on the most? And I think over the last probably 5 years, we've started to build a track record here. We introduced a product called System Link about 4 years ago that many of you may have heard of. It was mentioned a couple of times in the keynote. GM is working very closely with us on a solution that was described where it's about ingesting and then running analysis on battery data from their battery validation lab. And then about 2 years ago, I purchased a company called Optimal Plus. And so Optimal Plus is a leader now as part of NI in manufacturing analytics. And the specific focus is really on semiconductor and electronics. And so trying to get more insights about the chip and then be able to follow that chip as that chip becomes part of a board or as part of a module, as part of a car, or whatever the end product is going to look like, and having that ability to sort of see the history and the genealogy of that chip, and also understand about how it was made and what was the process behind these more and more complex devices that you're building. Now, if we look at kind of the framework we're going to use this week and how we're going to describe these things, these are really the 4 steps that we're going to use to describe the different phases of the digital transformation journey. Some people or some companies are really in the test phase. They've automated test. Believe it or not, you're going to hear about a customer this week. Automating of tests may seem like the most basic thing you can do, that everyone's already arrived with automation or automating everything. You're going to learn about a customer, I believe, this afternoon, who's actually going through the process of moving from really manual measurements to automation. And they're sort of at that early part of the journey. But for them, this is a huge transformation. They're really going to get a ton of efficiency and effectiveness out of that change. But I think probably most of you are in that category today. Then we're going to talk about Lifecycle Collect. So this is the next phase that we're describing, where we're starting to take all of that test data and let's centralize that data. Let's allow it to be compared and contrasted. So you can imagine 2 different facilities or the same facility, data from 2 different days or different machines. How do we bring all that data together and give ourselves the opportunity to start learning from all that data collectively, and to unlock organizations to have access to all the data that they need. Then we're going to talk about Lifecycle Detect. This is really where it goes from sort of raw data to the beginnings of insights. And so it really comes down to analysis, or often you'll hear the term analytics on your data. So that may be as simple as statistics. It may be running things like FFTs or just common types of mathematical operations. But it also is where you can start to introduce more revolutionary technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so these approaches are starting to be deployed by some of the companies that are really on kind of the bleeding edge of using state of the art. And so it all builds on the foundation, though, of having all that data accessible and ready to run those algorithms on. And then the last phase you'll hear about in this track is this notion of Lifecycle Act. And so this is really where everyone's trying to get, that we found. Ultimately, if you can we make automated decisions based on that data? Can I learn something? And it's not just to inform a person after the fact that something's happened or give me a weekly report. Those things are good. We should do those things. But if I have an opportunity, can I close the loop in real time or pseudo real time? Can I make a better decision? So an example of this in manufacturing could be adaptive testing, where based on the test results that you're getting, and if you're especially in industries where you're trying to reduce your test time, can I get indications that I have a good part or a bad part? And then I'm going to change the way that I'm testing that part based on what I'm seeing. And if I start to get concerned about the quality, I can run more tests. And if I start to see that this is a really good part, there's a lot of history with this part, I can understand that it's going to come back no trouble found, then I may reduce the amount of testing that I'm doing and pause tests, stop tests, and overall make my throughput increase for that production line. So all of that is highly dependent on sort of moving over time towards maturing the approach to digital transformation and sort of moving through these steps. Now these are our descriptions for these steps. You'll see these called other things, probably depending on which white paper you read or which YouTube video that you watch. But we want to use this as kind of a common framework to ground attendees for the rest of these sessions, and kind of over time we'll start actually with things like lifecycle tests, but we'll ultimately get to this notion of automation and closing the loop, and how do you get there, and what's possible on the other side of that. So let me kind of walk you through with that the rest of the track and give you sort of an overview of these other sessions that are going to go deeper into each one of these topics. So the framework we already covered, the products. Let's talk about the products that you're gonna hear about. You'll hear a lot about System Link that I mentioned. You'll hear a lot about Optimal Plus. We're going to try to not worry too much about the product names, the labels. You'll probably hear those terms, but we want to zero in more on just the capabilities and really about, we'll find, if you work with an eye, if we have a conversation about maybe engaging around one of these tools or even just learning from best practices, we'll try to keep it focused on your goals, your end deliverables, your outcomes. The products are just kind of a means to that end, but you will hear those two terms quite a bit. And then some of the terms you'll probably hear a lot about in the track, things like data harmonization. So this notion of taking data and if you're in the automotive industry, you may have data coming from your sites in Europe that are measuring something in kilometers per hour. The sites in the US may say miles per hour. So there's a notion of how do I get my units to match, to get my data in such a state that I'm able to compare and contrast what the data is telling me. Also, validation system management. So system management in general, if I just double click on that term, that's our way of describing operationally managing your assets, your test assets. So if I've got a bunch of testers that are in a lab or they're on the production floor, how do I know if they're still present, if they're working as expected, are they being used, how much are they being used, do I have a reason to believe that they're healthy or there's something wrong, or just plain old, like, what are they doing? What are they doing right now? Are they in, often our own manufacturing site, if we look at what the testers are doing, some of our testers may be pulled away from actually helping to test new products because we're having to retest something. And so understanding, is this really focused on sort of first pass yield, second pass yield, retest, what are my testers in use for? Adaptive manufacturing. So in our world, in our use case, we're really talking about how do we especially adapt the way that we test. So can we be smarter about the way that we actually do our tests, using data, using historical information from previous DUTs that we've tested in order to inform the way that we're going to test, moving forward, or for especially for long-standing tests or long-running tests, how do we shorten that test time, be more efficient? CM and supplier management. So you'll hear a lot about this challenge that we see where companies are often working with CMs to do their manufacturing or working with a supply chain to get parts and trying to understand the quality of these CMs or these the folks that are the companies that are building the parts that you need, and are they up to your standard, or what is the quality of the part that I'm getting, or I'm being charged for things like scrap, or being charged for things like am I getting my money's worth out of what my CM is doing, or am I being overcharged? Maybe there's a way to actually drive down some of those costs. And then last but certainly not least is just overall equipment efficiency. This is a pretty standard term that you'll sometimes hear. You'll hear the term OEE. How do I know sort of my uptime of my equipment? So it's very related to this notion of the operational management of your test equipment. So we're going to have a session coming up, session 2. Who's given session 2? Is that person in the room? Is that you, Josh? All right, so Josh Pruitt, who's in the back of the room, he's the product manager for System Link. He is going to be covering really that lifecycle test and that lifecycle collect, those two phases of what we talked about. And Josh, in addition to now being the product manager for System Link, has a long experience being in R&D, trying to work in our labs, trying to work with our hardware teams, and understanding how the challenges that you run into in a lab. Where are my assets? What are they doing? What's being used? Is what's being used calibrated? There's a whole host of issues there. So he's got a lot of personal experience there. He's also worked really closely with our manufacturing group. So he's going to cover this notion of how do we actually move beyond just sort of automated test into this lifecycle test where we're starting to connect things. There's connectivity of those test systems into some kind of centralizing force that allows you to get your data together. And then what does that look like? How do you harmonize data? How do you make sure that you've got security on your processes as you do this, so that things are encrypted, or that the data is restricted in terms of who can access it? There's a lot of concerns that we personally feel as a company that builds complicated products, and certainly as we talk to customers, you tell us about as well, which is there's a desire to go towards more and more of what we're describing here, but there's also counter pressures. There may be perception that we can't use the cloud. There may be a perception that there has to be a certain level of security, or that there's not enough security, so we have to overcome some of these challenges. So Josh is really going to take you through that in session 2. Session 3, we actually have a great guest speaker, Analog Devices, which is really exciting. So ADI is a very close partner. We have a great collaborative relationship with ADI and NI. And so they're going to talk about harmonizing data and the processes they go through to actually understand how to harmonize their data. What is the data source? How do we get to sort of a modeling layer that allows us to harmonize? And then the analytical tools that they use to analyze that data. And what have they learned on that journey? What's sort of their state-of-the-art best practice? And then finally, they're going to talk about this notion of using insights and turning those into actions, which is, as we talked about, it's probably the ultimate goal that everyone's trying to reach. So, you essentially have to have rules. You have to have, if this happens, here's what we're going to do about it. And so they're going to describe their process for doing that. Then we're going to have a session. Jay, can you remind me who's given session 4?
Session 4 is Ron, Jakey, but we're switching 4 and 5 due to some schedule.
That's right. Okay, so let me go to 5. So imagine this says 4. We're reversing a couple of sessions. So this is making actions smarter with AI and ML. Alon, is this your session? So Alon Malki, who's our chief data scientist, he's going to be giving this session. It's going to be a great session. Alon works typically very closely with customers, and I think data science is probably one of the most, or data science, machine learning, probably one of the more misunderstood practices. It's not black magic as much as I thought it was before Alon educated me. It actually is I think the way that it works best, it's a very collaborative process. You're working really closely with a customer. You're helping to sort of turn things you're finding into insights because you have access to their subject matter experts. And so this is a really interesting process, but there really is a very sophisticated flow of trying to go from data to building a model and deploying a model and having kind of the full life cycle in place to keep that model up to date and have it evolve. So that's going to be a really exciting session. And then the new session 5, NI in Action. This is one that Ron Chafee's giving. I don't think he's in the room, but he'll be here for that session. And we're really going to focus on the notion of how do we use, especially in a production context, how is NI working with customers and using their full manufacturing data in order to give them better outcomes. So this is really also in the ACT phase. I think you can think of this as kind of, even though the order is going to be reversed, this is kind of building towards a loan session where the ACT can be as simple as an algorithm that you wrote, but I think the most sophisticated version of that is some of these, machine learning models and AI. And then session 6, we use this phrase a lot at NI called we want to eat our own dog food, which I don't know if I've ever understood why this phrase came into being. It's a really weird way to put it, but it basically means we want to use our own tools internally. We want to, if we have a product that makes sense to use in validation, let's use it in validation. In this case, our own NI manufacturing group, which is a multi-site, multi-geography, global manufacturing organization, is using our product. So it's using System Link, it's using Optimal Plus. And so we have experiences basically being our own customer. And that's great from us getting a sense of what it's like to walk in your shoes, but also gives us our own set of insights about what is it like to go on the digital transformation journey. And so is this John that's giving this session? John? Okay, so some of the leaders from NI Manufacturing are going to give this session. And really the point is just to kind of share what we've learned and where are we in this process, because we're still on that journey too as a company using this ourselves. All right. So to kind of bring it home, as I said at the beginning, it's really exciting to have all of you here. I definitely want this track, I know this is shared by the other NI folks in the room, to be collaborative. It's not meant to be sort of a one-way presentation. So definitely ask questions throughout the day if you're going to stay in this track or you check out some of these sessions. Give us feedback. Let us know, like, where are you? Where's your company in the digital transformation journey? And help us understand, how can we work together? And how can we create a better outcome for NI and for you? So with that, I will wrap it up and we will get ready for the next session. So thank you very much.